My mother-in-law plotted with my husband's ex to fake a pregnancy and take our home. When I found out, they accused me of being unstable and tried to have me committed. My name is Rachel, 32F, and if someone had told me a year ago that my life would unravel in the most twisted, unbelievable way, I would have laughed. I married my husband, Tom, 34M, 5 years ago, and though we had our ups and downs, I always thought we were solid. But as it turns out, the foundation of our marriage was built on lies, deceit, and the meddling of two women who seemed hell-bent on destroying me. It started innocently enough. My relationship with my mother-in-law, Carol, 60F, had always been strained. She'd never liked me. From the moment Tom introduced us, I could feel her disapproval radiate from across the room. She'd wanted him to marry his high school sweetheart, Claire, 33F, a woman she practically raised alongside him. But Tom had moved on from Claire years ago, at least I thought he had. Carol, however, seemed to think differently. She'd constantly compare me to her, praising Claire's grace and family values in subtle digs that I pretended not to hear. A few months ago, Carol began visiting our home more frequently. She'd show up unannounced, her lips pursed in disapproval as she surveyed my home. She'd make comments about how I decorated, how I kept house, and even went as far as suggesting I take homemaking tips from Claire. According to Carol, Claire had just gone through a difficult breakup and could use some friends. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that Carol just didn't know how to move on. But soon, things started to get strange. One night, Tom and I were sitting in the living room when he mentioned that Claire had reached out to him. I tried to keep my cool, but something in the way he spoke about her raised a red flag. He seemed nostalgic, as if their past held some kind of unresolved tension. I asked him why she contacted him, and he simply shrugged, saying she wanted to catch up. It felt off, but I let it go, not wanting to seem insecure. Then, a few weeks later, Claire started showing up at our house too. She'd stop by under the pretense of visiting Carol, who would always be just around the corner. Conveniently leaving me alone with Claire, she'd sit in my kitchen, sipping tea with a smug smile on her face, and tell me how much Tom had changed since they were together. She'd reminisce about their shared memories, acting as if I was just a placeholder in a life that had once belonged to her. One day, I came home early from work to find Carol and Claire together in my living room, flipping through our family photo albums. My blood boiled as I saw Claire holding a picture of my wedding day, a look of disdain on her face. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, feeling the ground shift beneath me. Carol glanced up, her expression icy. "We were just talking about how things used to be," she said, as if that was a valid reason for letting my husband's ex-wife lounge around my house. "I don't care what you were talking about. This is my home, and you're not welcome here, Claire," I snapped, my voice trembling with anger. Claire gave me a condescending smile, shrugging as if my outrage was nothing more than a child's tantrum. "Oh, don't be so territorial, Rachel," she replied. "Tom and I go way back. I'm practically family." At that moment, I realized that something was terribly wrong. They weren't just here to reminisce. There was an undercurrent of malice in their words, a sinister edge that sent chills down my spine. I confronted Tom that night, telling him I didn't want Claire or his mother in our home anymore. He brushed it off, telling me I was overreacting, that I was letting my jealousy get the best of me. I could see the disappointment in his eyes, the frustration that I didn't share his compassion for Claire. And then, the real nightmare began. One morning, Carol and Claire barged into my house, claiming that Claire was pregnant. I was stunned, disbelief flooding through me as I looked from one woman to the other. Carol wore a look of smug satisfaction, while Claire's face was an infuriating mask of innocence. "This baby belongs in a stable family, Rachel," Carol said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Tom should be with someone who can give him a real family." I felt like the world was spinning, my mind reeling as I tried to process their words. Claire went on to describe a fabricated affair she claimed she'd had with Tom, complete with invented details designed to rip my heart out. I knew it couldn't be true. Tom had his flaws, but he wasn't a cheater. Still, they pressed on, insisting that Tom and Claire had rekindled their true love and that I was simply in the way. They even presented what they claimed were evidence, forged emails, doctored photos, and text messages. It was a meticulously constructed web of lies, and the more they spoke, the more I felt myself losing my grip on reality. Carol and Claire accused me of being unstable, of refusing to accept the truth of the situation. They insisted that Tom was too afraid to tell me himself, and that they were here to help me come to terms with it. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I felt trapped, suffocated by their lies, and yet a small part of me wondered if there was something I'd missed. They were so confident, so relentless in their manipulation, that I began to doubt myself. That's when Carol suggested I take some time away, implying that I needed to sort through my feelings in a safe environment. She recommended a mental health retreat, a place where I could get the help I needed. At first, I was horrified. They were trying to make me out to be insane, hoping to sideline me so they could take over my life, my home, and my husband. I refused, of course, but their insistence grew stronger. Carol even started leaving brochures for psychiatric facilities around the house, acting as if she was concerned about my mental health. I could see what they were trying to do, and I knew I had to fight back. The next few days were a blur of tension and anxiety. Tom was distant, spending more time at work and barely speaking to me. I didn't know if he was in on their scheme or if he was just too oblivious to see what was happening. I began to feel isolated, unsure of who I could trust. It was as if Carol and Claire had managed to create a wedge between us, one that I couldn't seem to bridge. Then, one evening, Carol and Claire showed up at my door with Tom in tow. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot as they laid out their latest plan. They wanted me to sign over the deed to our home, claiming it was for the baby. I was outraged, refusing outright, but they pressed on, insisting that if I truly loved Tom, I would do what was best for the family. When I stood my ground, Carol's expression darkened. She turned to Tom, whispering something in his ear. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration, as if I was the problem, the one standing in the way of his happiness. I realized in that moment that they'd poisoned him against me, filling his head with lies and manipulations until he couldn't see the truth anymore. They continued their psychological assault, accusing me of being paranoid, delusional, and unstable. Carol even went so far as to hint that they had me evaluated and that professionals agreed I needed serious help. I felt trapped, cornered by their lies, and I knew that if I didn't find a way to expose them, they would succeed in destroying my life. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them win. I would gather evidence, document everything, and find a way to prove that they were the ones conspiring against me. It wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to fight back. This was my life, my marriage, and my home, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me. After that night, I knew I couldn't just sit back and let Carol and Claire rip my life apart. They were building a fortress of lies, and if I didn't do something fast, they'd have me labeled as unfit or insane, out of my home, and possibly divorced. It was time to start gathering evidence and documenting everything. My mind was racing, plotting out a strategy as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The next morning, I played along, acting as if I was willing to consider Carol's suggestion of getting help. I needed to keep them off my back long enough to find something I could use against them. I started keeping a journal of every encounter, writing down the things they said, the lies they told, and any threats they made. I also bought a small voice recorder that I kept in my pocket, ready to capture their manipulative words. But I needed more than just my notes. I needed to get someone else involved, someone who could help me document this conspiracy before it spiraled any further out of control. I thought about hiring a private investigator, but with Carol and Tom controlling our finances, I had limited access to money. So I turned to the one person I knew I could trust, my best friend, Megan 32F. Megan and I had been friends since college, and she'd always been my rock. She'd seen me through every high and low, and she'd never liked Tom or Carol for that matter. I called her that afternoon, my hands shaking as I explained what was happening. She listened in shocked silence, and when I finished, she let out a long sigh. "Rachel, this is insane," she said, her voice thick with disbelief. "I always knew Carol was manipulative, but I had no idea she'd go this far. And Tom, I can't believe he's letting this happen." "I know," I whispered, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I need your help, Megan. They're trying to make me out to be crazy, to take everything from me. I need to prove what they're doing." Without hesitation, Megan agreed to help. She was relentless, diving into research on how to document psychological manipulation and researching legal options. We came up with a plan. She'd start discreetly recording our conversations whenever she was around Carol or Claire, and she'd act as a witness whenever possible. It felt like we were building a case, piece by piece, but I knew we'd need solid proof to make anyone believe us. Over the next few weeks, I continued playing the part of the unraveling wife, acting meek and defeated whenever Carol and Claire were around. They took the bait, growing bolder in their attempts to break me down. Carol began stopping by unannounced even more often, checking in on me with the guise of concern. She'd make patronizing comments about my appearance, my mental state, and my ability to keep a healthy home. Each time, I'd nod and agree, letting her think she had me right where she wanted me. Then, one day, Carol slipped up. We were alone in the kitchen, and she leaned in close, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "You know, Rachel, I warned Tom that you weren't stable enough to handle this family. I told him Claire would be a better wife, a better mother. He's finally seeing it now. It's only a matter of time before he comes to his senses and gets rid of you." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I clicked the voice recorder in my pocket, capturing every word. It was the first real piece of evidence I had, and it felt like a small victory in a long battle. Later that night, I played the recording for Megan. She listened, her face growing red with anger. "That one is a monster," she hissed. "We need to keep going, Rachel. We need more." But Carol's insults weren't the only thing on my mind. I began noticing changes in Tom's behavior. He'd come home late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. He was constantly on his phone, texting in hushed tones, and when I asked him who he was talking to, he brushed me off. It wasn't just his detachment. It was as if he was a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. I began to wonder if there was more to his relationship with Claire than they were letting on. Fueled by suspicion, I decided to follow him one evening. I knew he was meeting someone, so I waited until he left and tailed into a small, upscale restaurant on the other side of town. Sure enough, I spotted him and Claire, sitting at a corner table, their heads close together, whispering. I felt a surge of anger, betrayal clawing at my chest as I watched them, my heart breaking all over again. I pulled out my phone, snapping a few photos from a distance. It wasn't much, but it was something. I couldn't confront him now, not without risking everything. Instead, I returned home, my mind racing, determined to keep collecting evidence. When Tom returned that night, I pretended to be asleep, my heart pounding as he slipped into bed beside me. I lay there in the dark, listening to his steady breathing, feeling the weight of his betrayal pressing down on me. I knew now that this went deeper than just Carol's manipulations. Tom was part of it too, and he'd been lying to me all along. The next morning, I met with Megan, showing her the photos I'd taken. "It's exactly what we thought," she said, her voice a mixture of anger and determination. "He's in on it. They're trying to drive you out, Rachel. We have to stop them." We continued our investigation, uncovering small but damning pieces of evidence. Megan managed to dig up financial records showing that Tom had been transferring money to an account with Claire's name on it. He was funneling our savings to her, probably to help her with the fake pregnancy story they were concocting. With each new discovery, the depth of their betrayal became clearer, and my resolve to fight back grew stronger. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Carol showed up with two men in scrubs, orderlies from a local mental health facility. She claimed that she was there for an intervention, insisting that I'd been displaying signs of paranoia and instability. She handed Tom a stack of paperwork, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction as she explained that she'd arranged for me to be evaluated for my own safety. My heart raced as I realized what was happening. They were trying to have me committed, to lock me away so they could take everything from me without a fight. I felt the walls closing in, panic clawing at my chest as I turned to Tom, searching for a trace of the man I'd married. "Tom, please," I begged, my voice shaking. "You can't let her do this. You know I'm not crazy." He looked at me, his face cold and unyielding. "Rachel, this is for your own good. You need help, and I think deep down you know that." In that moment, I knew I was truly alone. They'd planned this meticulously, cornering me in my own home, stripping me of my agency. But as the orderlies approached, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I'd been collecting evidence, and Megan had copies of everything. They might take me now, but I'd built a safety net, a way to expose them once and for all. As they led me out of the house, I glanced back at Carol and Tom, their expressions smug and satisfied. They thought they'd won, but they had no idea what was coming. I had one last card to play, and I was determined to use it. I'd find a way to escape this nightmare, no matter what it took. As the orderlies drove me to the mental health facility, my mind raced. I had prepared for this, but now that it was actually happening, fear threatened to overwhelm me. I clutched my bag, where I'd hidden my phone, hoping they wouldn't confiscate it. I knew this was part of Carol and Tom's plan to isolate me, to make me powerless, but they underestimated my resolve. I wasn't going to let them win. When we arrived at the facility, the staff began processing me, asking routine questions while I played along, feigning cooperation. I knew I needed to buy myself some time, enough to contact Megan and set my plan in motion. They assigned me a room, sterile and devoid of any personal touches, just 4 walls and a bed that made me feel like I was already buried alive. As soon as I was alone, I dug out my phone and sent a quick message to Megan. "They got me here. It's worse than we thought. Need you to act on everything we found." I waited, staring at the screen, my heart pounding until a reply popped up. "Hang tight. I'm coming for you." I breathed a sigh of relief. Megan had copies of every piece of evidence we gathered. She was my lifeline, my only hope of exposing Carol and Tom's plan before they managed to strip me of everything I had left. I knew she would start making calls, gathering allies, and putting the evidence out there if necessary. In the meantime, I focused on gaining the trust of the staff. I feigned compliance, acting calm and cooperative, answering questions politely. I needed them to think I was stable, that there was no reason to keep me under constant surveillance. Within a few days, I'd managed to convince them I wasn't a threat, that I could be trusted to walk around the grounds unsupervised. They even allowed me access to the small library, where I could spend a few hours alone each day. As I wandered the halls, I listened carefully, picking up bits of information about the facility's schedule, the shifts of the staff, and the layout of the building. I was gathering data, biding my time, planning my escape. I knew Megan was working tirelessly on the outside, and I had to be ready when the opportunity presented itself. One evening, as I was heading back to my room, I overheard 2 nurses talking about a storm that was expected to hit the next night. They were complaining about the likelihood of power outages, about the chaos that would ensue if the generators failed. It was the opening I'd been waiting for. If the storm knocked out the power, security would be weaker, and I might have a chance to slip out unnoticed. That night, I contacted Megan again, sharing my plan. She responded immediately, telling me that she'd be waiting nearby with a car. She assured me she had everything ready to release to the press, including the audio recordings of Carol and the photos of Tom with Claire. If we could get this out, their lies would unravel, and they'd be forced to face the consequences of their actions. The next day, I watched the sky darken, the wind picking up as the storm rolled in. By evening, rain pelted the windows, and I could hear the rumble of thunder in the distance. I kept a close eye on the staff, waiting for the moment when the lights would flicker, signaling the beginning of my escape. And then it happened. A crack of thunder, a brief flicker, and suddenly, the facility was plunged into darkness. The emergency lights kicked on, but I could see the panic spreading among the staff. They scrambled to check on patients, moving quickly as they tried to maintain order. I slipped out of my room, moving quietly down the hallway, my heart racing as I approached the side door I'd noticed earlier. I pushed on the door, relieved to find it unlocked, and slipped out into the storm. The rain was relentless, soaking me within seconds, but I didn't care. I dashed across the lawn, my feet slipping on the wet grass as I ran towards the edge of the property. I spotted a pair of headlights in the distance, and as I got closer, I saw Megan waving from the driver's seat. I scrambled into the car, breathless and shaking, barely able to speak as she sped away from the facility. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were free, at least for now. As we drove through the rain, Megan handed me a folder. Inside were copies of the evidence we collected, the photos, the financial records, and a detailed summary of everything we'd uncovered. She explained that she'd been in touch with a lawyer, someone who specialized in cases like mine. With this evidence, we had a fighting chance of taking down Carol and Tom, of exposing their schemes before they could bury me any further. But it wasn't enough just to go to the authorities. We needed to control the narrative, to make sure people understood the extent of their betrayal. Megan suggested reaching out to a reporter she knew, someone who would be interested in breaking the story wide open. We spent the next few hours crafting a statement, detailing the conspiracy, the manipulation, and the lengths they'd gone to in order to destroy my life. By dawn, we'd sent everything to the reporter, along with a promise of exclusive access to the story if he acted quickly. We knew this was a risk, but it was our only option. With the evidence now in the world, Carol and Tom wouldn't be able to hide behind their lies. They'd be exposed for who they really were. As we waited for a response, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. I'd escaped their trap, but the fight was far from over. I knew they'd come after me, that they'd do everything in their power to silence me. But I wasn't the same person I'd been before. I was stronger now, and with Megan by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. That evening, the reporter called. He'd reviewed the evidence, and he was eager to move forward with the story. He assured us that it would be published the next morning, that he'd already lined up interviews with people who could corroborate my claims. It was a small victory, but it was enough to keep me going. As I hung up, I felt a surge of hope. Carol and Tom had tried to destroy me, to strip me of everything I held dear. But I was still here, and I wasn't backing down. They'd underestimated me, and now they were about to pay the price. The next morning, the article hit the internet like a bomb. The headline was bold and damning: "Woman fights back after mother-in-law's conspiracy to have her committed." The story laid everything bare: the fake pregnancy, the manipulation, the attempt to steal my home, and the plan to have me declared unstable. The reporter had done an incredible job piecing together the details we provided and making the story compelling enough to go viral. Within hours, the story was picked up by other outlets. Social media exploded with outrage, and people were sharing the article with comments that ranged from shock to disgust. I could feel the tide turning, as if the weight of all the lies was finally being lifted. For the first time, the truth was out there, and I wasn't the villain. Carol and Tom were the ones under scrutiny now, and they were quickly learning how it felt to be on the receiving end of public scorn. Megan and I spent the day watching the news spread, fielding messages from reporters and supporters alike. Even people I hadn't heard from in years reached out, expressing their disbelief and offering their help. It was overwhelming, but it gave me a sense of validation I hadn't felt in a long time. After everything they'd put me through, people finally understood my side of the story. By evening, I received a call from my lawyer. He informed me that Carol and Tom had filed a defamation lawsuit against me, claiming that the article was full of lies and that I was the one trying to ruin their lives. I felt a brief flicker of panic, but he assured me that they didn't have a leg to stand on. We had mountains of evidence backing up our claims, and the legal team was already working on a countersuit. This was just their desperate attempt to silence me, but it was too late for that. The truth was out, and there was no going back. That night, I received another message, this time from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was short and vicious. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. You'll pay for this one way or another." I knew it was from Tom. It felt like a last pathetic attempt to scare me, but it only fueled my resolve. They were losing control, and it terrified them. I blocked the number and turned off my phone, determined not to let them intimidate me anymore. I wasn't the one living in fear now, they were. The following day, I met with my lawyer to discuss our next steps. He suggested we file a restraining order against both Carol and Tom, citing the emotional abuse, the harassment, and the recent attempts to have me committed. It would be a strong case, especially with the evidence we had. I agreed, feeling a sense of relief as I signed the paperwork. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about taking back my life, piece by piece. Over the next week, things moved quickly. The restraining order was granted, and both Carol and Tom were legally barred from contacting me or coming within a certain distance of my home. It was a small victory, but it gave me the peace of mind I'd been craving. With them out of my life, I could finally start to heal, to rebuild the things they'd tried to destroy. But they weren't done fighting. Carol's lawyer released a public statement, accusing me of fabricating the entire story. She claimed that I was the one who'd been abusive, that I was mentally unstable, and that I'd concocted this tale to ruin her family. It was a classic case of projection, and anyone who knew her could see through the lies. But I knew the court of public opinion was fickle, and I had to stay vigilant. As the media frenzy continued, I decided to make a statement of my own. I sat down with the same reporter who had broken the story, agreeing to an on-camera interview. I wanted people to hear my side directly from me, to see the pain and betrayal I'd endured. I recounted everything, holding nothing back. I talked about how Carol had manipulated my husband, how she teamed up with his ex, and how they tried to gaslight me into thinking I was losing my mind. I explained the toll it had taken on me, the nights I'd spent questioning my own reality, and the strength it took to fight back. The interview aired that night, and the response was immediate. People flooded social media with support, condemning Carol and Tom's actions. The public was firmly on my side, and it seemed like everyone wanted to see them face the consequences of their schemes. I knew there would still be battles ahead, but for the first time, I felt like I had an army behind me. I wasn't alone in this fight. Then, in a shocking twist, another woman came forward with her own story about Carol. She claimed that years ago, she'd been involved with Carol's eldest son, and that Carol had done everything in her power to drive them apart. She described a similar pattern of manipulation, lies, and cruelty. Her story only added fuel to the fire, painting a picture of a woman who had spent her life using others for her own gain. With this new testimony, the press descended on Carol's home, demanding answers. She refused to speak to them, hiding behind the walls of her estate as the world turned against her. She'd spent years cultivating a reputation as a pillar of the community, But now that image was crumbling. People were starting to see her for who she really was, a bitter, vengeful woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. In the midst of all this, Tom reached out to me through his lawyer, offering a settlement if I agreed to retract my statements and end the countersuit. It was tempting, but I refused. I didn't want his money. I wanted justice. I wanted him and Carol to face the consequences of their actions, to be held accountable for the pain they'd caused. I knew this battle was far from over, but I was ready for whatever came next. The following week, my lawyer received word that Carol was planning to leave the country. It was a desperate move, an attempt to escape the mounting legal troubles and the public backlash. But we had anticipated this, and we acted quickly, filing a motion to freeze her assets and prevent her from fleeing. The court granted our request, and Carol was forced to stay and face the music. As the legal proceedings began, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for so long. I knew it would be a long, arduous process, but I was finally on the path to justice. I had fought back against the people who had tried to destroy me, and I had come out stronger. No matter what happened next, I knew I had already won. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my peace. And as I sat in the courtroom, watching Carol squirm under the weight of her own lies, I felt a sense of satisfaction that words couldn't describe. She had tried to break me, but in the end, she had only broken herself. The courtroom was packed as the trial began. Word had spread far and wide, and the public was hungry for justice. The media had latched onto every detail, painting Carol and Tom as the villains of a twisted drama. I took my seat with my lawyer beside me, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. This was it, the moment I had fought so hard for. The chance to finally see them held accountable for all the pain and suffering they had caused. Carol and Tom sat at the defendant's table, flanked by their high-priced attorneys. Carol, once poised and composed, looked visibly worn, her face pale and drawn. Tom, who had always exuded arrogance, now seemed small, a mere shadow of the man who once thought he could control my life. They both avoided my gaze, focusing on their papers, their eyes hollow. The trial began with opening statements. My lawyer was precise and methodical, laying out the facts with a confidence that filled me with hope. He detailed the elaborate scheme Carol and Tom had concocted, the fake pregnancy, the gaslighting, the attempt to have me committed, and the slanderous accusations they had spread to discredit me. As he spoke, I felt a sense of vindication. My story was finally being heard, and the truth was undeniable. The prosecution brought forth a series of witnesses, each one helping to build a damning case against them. Megan testified first, recounting the months she had spent helping me gather evidence and witnessing Carol's manipulative behavior firsthand. Her testimony was powerful, and I could see the jury members reacting to her words. They were beginning to see the extent of Carol's deception, to understand the depth of her cruelty. Next, my lawyer called upon the reporter who had covered my story. She spoke about the extensive research she had done, the documents she had reviewed, and the corroborating testimonies from others who had experienced similar treatment at Carol's hands. She even presented the messages I had received from Carol and Tom, revealing their attempts to intimidate and silence me. The jury's faces grew darker with each new piece of evidence, and I felt a glimmer of hope that justice was within reach. Then it was time for Carol's attorney to present their case. They tried to paint me as a bitter woman seeking revenge, desperate to ruin Carol and Tom out of spite. They claimed that I had fabricated the entire story, that I was unstable and obsessed, that I had exaggerated every detail in an attempt to gain sympathy. Carol sat there, nodding along, her face twisted into a mask of feigned innocence, but I could see through her act, and I knew the jury could too. Their defense fell apart when my lawyer presented the evidence we had uncovered, emails, texts, even financial records showing how Carol had funneled money to her son's ex, helping her keep up the facade of the pregnancy. They showed payments made to a private investigator, hired to dig up dirt on me, to fuel their narrative that I was mentally unstable. It was a mountain of proof that was impossible to ignore. Then it was time for Carol to take the stand. She was visibly shaken as she walked to the witness box, her once confident demeanor replaced by a nervous, twitchy energy. She stumbled through her testimony, trying to defend herself, but each word only seemed to dig her deeper into a hole. She claimed she had only been trying to protect her family, that she had never intended for things to go this far, but her excuses rang hollow. Finally, it was my turn to testify. I took a deep breath, looking out at the jury, and I spoke from the heart. I recounted the agony of discovering Carol's betrayal, the pain of realizing that Tom had conspired with her, and the terror of being gaslit into questioning my own sanity. I told them about the nights I spent lying awake, wondering if I would ever escape their grasp, and the strength it had taken to fight back. As I spoke, I could see the sympathy in the jury's eyes. They understood now, they could see the truth, and they were appalled by the lengths Carol and Tom had gone to destroy me. I finished my testimony, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. No matter the outcome, I had stood up for myself, and I had told my story. When the jury finally returned with their verdict, my heart raced. The judge read the verdict aloud, and the words hit me like a wave of relief. Guilty. Carol and Tom were found guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and defamation. The judge sentenced them to substantial fines and community service, and Carol was ordered to attend mandatory counseling. There was even talk of criminal charges being filed against them, depending on the findings of further investigations. The courtroom erupted in whispers, and I felt a surge of satisfaction knowing they would finally face the consequences of their actions. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the trial was immense. Carol's reputation was in ruins, and she was ostracized from the social circles she had once dominated. Tom lost his job and was forced to move out of town, unable to escape the shame of his actions. Their family was fractured beyond repair, torn apart by the very lies they had built their lives upon. As for me, I finally felt free. The nightmare was over, and I was able to reclaim my life. I spent time reconnecting with friends, rebuilding the relationships I had neglected while I was trapped in that toxic web. I even found the courage to start dating again, opening myself up to the possibility of love and trust. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Carol, handwritten and filled with words of remorse. She begged for my forgiveness, claiming that she had been blinded by jealousy and fear, that she had only wanted what was best for her son. She asked if we could meet, if there was any way to repair the damage she had done. I read the letter and felt a pang of sadness. I knew she was desperate, that she was grasping for redemption now that she had lost everything. But I couldn't bring myself to forgive her, not after all the pain she had caused. I had moved on, and I didn't need her in my life. I tore up the letter, letting the pieces fall into the trash. My future was my own, and I was done looking back. With the nightmare behind me, I began a new chapter, one filled with hope and possibilities. I had faced the darkness, survived the worst, and emerged stronger. Carol and Tom had tried to break me, but in the end, they had only revealed the strength I never knew I had. And as I walked into the future, free from their control, I knew I would never allow anyone to dim my light again. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my peace, and that was the greatest victory of all.